And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 131st episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, March 3rd, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, we will talk about a couple of really tough road losses this past week against Purdue and Illinois, but I think we can all agree that they were a little bit different in terms of losses compared to many of the losses that Indiana has suffered this season. But then we will get on to the final home games and what that means, of course, and our predictions and just kind of a general conversation over the next 5 or 6 days before the Big Ten tournament next week, which will kind of all of it just segues into the next topic while we preview Minnesota and Wisconsin coming up today/tomorrow and then this weekend. But here with me tonight, Matt and I, of course, had a very interesting podcast to say the least last week. So I'm going to open it up to Nithin first and just Nithin, how you been? And is there anything you want to talk about that you might not have gotten to have the chance before last week?
No, I just got to say, we got to make sure we're all on Twitter in case someone else commits to Indiana in the next 45 minutes or so. Good. Matt's on Twitter duty. Awesome. Yeah. Christian Lander. I mean, he's the big recruiting news from the last week. Obviously committed when you guys are recording last Tuesday. Big in-state scalp for Archie. So, he still gets a gold star in that area. As far as the team goes, I mean, yeah, it was a 2-loss week, but it had a different vibe to it than some of the previous ones that we've seen throughout the course of the season. So definitely interested to hear what you guys have to say, but we'll get into that as we keep going.
How are you doing tonight, Matt?
I'm doing great. It's great to not be a Maryland fan right now. So that's all I have to say.
But I do want to linger a second, Nathan, which that's why I opened the floor up with you on that Christian Landers talk, since we were caught off guard, and the only reactions you got were genuine live reactions, which is in itself something that I don't think you ever see in terms of a podcast, especially not a media outlet of Indiana HQ, where we rarely break news, and especially at least give you our live reaction on air as it was coming to fruition. But Nathan, talk a little bit about what your thought process was when Christian Lander said yes to Indiana in the moment, because I know you said that you actually heard it first on the air when you were listening to us in the background doing the work that went when you were away from your mic. But what does that commitment mean to Indiana, and what are just your general thoughts on Christian Lander and then maybe his basketball play?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who's a big deal as far as a high school player is concerned. He's a 5-star recruit, top 10 in the nation. And, the point guard position is the most important position in basketball. And right now, Indiana has some question marks right there. Rob Finney, in measured doses, is still a really important basketball player to this team. But Christian Lander is just a whole different stratosphere as far as somebody who can come into this program and contribute. Now, there are there's one interesting question, and that's surrounding his reclassification, whether or not he's going to move up to 2020 from 2021. If he does, Indiana's going to get a player who can make an immediate impact. However, just, stepping back for just a second, this is a guy, it's unfair to ask him to be the savior, the next Steph Curry or James Harden or whatever for this team. It's not going to be like that, especially if he reclassifies a year earlier. He's going to be younger. He's going to be 18 years old when he steps foot on campus. There's going to be an adjustment process, especially in the Big Ten. But still a guy who's extremely explosive off the dribble, a guy who can set up teammates really nicely. He rebounds pretty well for his position and for his size. All things that would be a huge boost to IU's team next year. And look, Devontae Green, obviously polarizing as a basketball player, but he's not going to be on the team next year, and Lander will take his spot and his minutes, and even though he has a different skill set.
For sure. And I think you definitely, the point that I wanted to make after being able to process a little bit what the news that came out, exactly your point that you just said, Nathan, where we shouldn't at least expect him to be the savior and to be the one and only thing that fixes Indiana basketball for them to get back to the Sweet 16, Elite Eight, into the Final Four. That's a lot of pressure for this kid, and it's basically, I think, why there's if a stain on some fans, if you will, for Romeo, is because I think people might have expected maybe a little bit too much for what they thought that his play on the court was going to make the entire team get to the Sweet 16 instead of and when you actually look back at a freshman season, again, a lot of these are still freshman season, averaging 14, 15, 16 points a season is still really, really good, no less for a freshman, and then no less with a guy that had a bad hand. But then you also think about if this reclassification is able to actually hold true, there's a very good chance that we might not find out this information until the summer. And even if we find out about it today or in the summer, the timeline isn't going to change. He's going to have to take some classes just to graduate, because in high school, you can't go to the NCAA. It's not like leaving college early where you can just leave. You have to graduate to be able to get into these programs, so he still has to graduate. And by all accounts, he's been interested in this before he committed to Indiana this early, and before he was thinking about all of his collegiate decisions on a deeper level. But he's going to have to take some classes, and that means he probably won't get on campus until August, early to mid-August, kind of right before the actual semester starts. And then really 2 to 3 months, 2.5-ish months away is when there's real basketball. And then what is that, 5 months away-ish, if you don't even include the December Big Ten games, that's conference play against real opponents, not including whoever Maui teams that they might see, or non-conference opponents. That's 5 months after he steps on campus. A 17-year-old, well, really, he'll technically be 18, but
at that point,
very, very young 18-year-old will be put into a situation to play against the 23, 24-year-old guys that are much more experienced than him, and obviously at a completely different level. So long story short, I don't think we should make him the savior, but on the other hand, he is definitely, Matt, I think, someone that is going to turn things around, at least in terms of, for a good way, in terms of running this offense.
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's the number one point guard in his class. If you look down the list of number one point guards in prior classes, and you keep going down the list, he's in company with a lot of good names. Lonzo Ball, John Wall, like a lot of really, really good one and done college point guards. The problem is he's reclassifying. So he's taking a year of development in AAU and high school and maturation as a person, and he's taking that out of the equation and quickly bumping up the skill level. While that will benefit him in the long run, because as you see with people who go up a level in anything they do early,
Luka Doncic.
You look
professional experience in
that's
for a
basketball,
while.
But you can look at people who, like in soccer, right? If you go up in age groups, you go from the under 8s to the under 11s. It's a different, it's a different skill level, right? In the under 8s, it's like great if you can like run around and know what the ball is. And the under 11s, people actually like start to care about playing defense. So it's that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, if playing up a level makes people better. You look at any young prodigy, if they play up a level, they get better, and they kind of credit that to their success. So it's going to be good for Christian in the long run. The problem is it's going to take him time to get used to that. So don't expect him to come into the team, even though he's the number one point guard in the 5-star recruit. Don't expect him to come in the team and average like 20 points a game, 10 assists. Don't expect him to be what we expected Romeo to be coming in, because he's there. That's apples and oranges. It's not the same. And he doesn't have as defined of a role as Romeo did coming to the team, right? Romeo had the team was his. Like, he'd come in and play and do however he wanted to, because the ball was going to go through him. We knew that was going to happen. With this team, the ball's going through Trace. The ball's going through Rob Finney, a third-year starting point guard. He's going to have to fit himself into that equation and figure out where he belongs. So he's going to take some time for him to be one of our better players. I think he has the basketball IQ to, quickly adapt, but it's going to be a process for him, especially, as you said, as a young 18-year-old, where these guys who are coming in have an extra year of experience, an extra year of playing under their belt.
Yeah, and you even mentioned John Wall. I don't even. That's a huge stretch, because remember when John Wall played, he was this. He was basically the Zion Williamson of the NCAA, to where he was the number one overall pick by far.
I'm just.
It wasn't a question.
I'm just saying.
But I know what you mean. Yeah. And then another aspect of this that I forgot to mention earlier is also that. With all of the summer stuff, like you were talking, Matt, with the AAU development, summer is a huge time for all of these big basketball tournaments and everything. And that's going to be a time that he's going to have to say, I can't do basketball, which is hard for a lot of these guys to do. And I'm going to have to take classes, and I'm going to have to put basketball aside for a couple of months so I can come here early. So that's a decision that's completely up to him, that I would totally not fault him for going to play his senior year of high school ball and then coming back the year after, just because of it's whatever he feels comfortable with, because I don't want him to rush into anything without, and also just let alone the pressure that he's going to get regardless of our first opening 10-minute rant of saying don't put too much pressure on him. But that being said, right before we transition to Purdue and Illinois, even if he does come next year, that this is not us saying that he's going to be like he's not going to contribute or whatsoever.
He's not going to be a bust.
Yeah, he's not going to be a bust. He's going to be good. It's just not going. Just don't expect a John Wall performance for his first year as a freshman. But let's get on to, and I think the tone of this conversation is a little different than because technically Indiana lost 2 games this last week. The tone of this, minus even all the Christian Lander talk, should be normally really bad or just really frustrating. And that's not what it was, because I think this Hoosier team is now playing less like their Michigan performance and playing more consistently, which is what just everyone has been asking for. And I think you ask most reasonable fans this week, and they're like, I'd take a loss if they fought to the end. And if you sort of kind of count Purdue, kind of sort of, they fought to the end-ish. It was just a rough way to get there. And then Illinois was obviously a hard-fought battle that was no more than like 6 or 7 points the entire game. And it was just a different type of Hoosier team that we saw mostly the last 2 weeks, if you take away the first half of the Purdue game. So, Nathan, what did you see in these 2 road losses? And I know Matt and I said last week that 2 losses, definitely not the end of the world. They're still able to make up ground, but were these 2 losses games that? I mean, obviously we're frustrating at the end, especially with the Illinois that we'll dive into a little more deeper in a second, but not necessarily forgivable. But did you at least like how Indiana was kind of trying to change the way that they've been playing, at least in losses and on the road?
Yeah, so the effort was there. I think that's where things start. You know, that this is a team who, when you looked at games at Ohio State, at Penn State, the Michigan game you mentioned earlier, it was hard to really see that intensity there for 40 minutes. That was different this past week. There are still some clear season-long weaknesses that this team has had that were exposed on Wednesday and then again on Sunday. You know, the jump shooting is a problem. Getting the ball consistently to Trace Jackson Davis is still a problem. But these are things that Indiana's trying to get better at. And you know, if you look at the numbers since the start of February, IU's 3-point shooting is improving, and Trace Jackson Davis has had a couple of big games here. So, you know, it's not all sunshine and rainbows because you did lose 2 games still to a couple of, long-time Big Ten rivals. But, the intensity was there. The effort was there. And if they and I think the reason IU fans are maybe a little less panicky now compared to where they normally would be after 2 losses, is if they keep that effort going this week, they should at least win 1 game, if not both.
For sure.
Because, at Assembly Hall, as we've seen, the shots start falling more frequently, and players like, Devontae Green or Rob Finney all of a sudden become just a little bit better. And Indiana as a team just plays better when they're at home. So that's what IU fans are hoping, that effort and energy and focus transfers over. But let's face it, if they shoot 25% or whatever they did against Purdue last week, they're not going to win any more games. So at the end of the day, it's still about putting the ball in the basket. But All in all, Indiana still very much controls their fate as far as NCAA tournament selection goes.
For sure. And then Matt, with the Purdue game specifically, where the final score 57-49 favor of Purdue, there's the other side, the more frustrating side, that Purdue has just dominated Indiana on the basketball court the last few years, and especially in Archie Miller's era. So, what's your side, maybe? For the more frustrating side instead of more the optimistic side, where the Hoosiers were able to fight till the very end, and it wasn't necessarily like they just gave up in the second half like Penn State on the road.
Yeah, I'm upset about a 10-minute stretch in this game from the last minute of the first half to like 7 or 8 minutes into the second half. That is the stretch in which I'm upset about this IU basketball team. Their lack of effort on defense, their lack of shot making on offense, actually just their lack of composure on offense during that 10-minute run in the Purdue game, where we got outscored by almost 20 points in that run, is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. I get this is Purdue's Super Bowl, right? Like, Boilermakers get up for this game. It's at home. They play better at home than they do on the road, and it's us. And they see that they literally see red when they see us. Like they're Super Bowl,
and their eyes get red too. Yeah,
their eyes get red. Yeah, all of it, everything. And they for whatever reason, Matt Painter has done a really good job of getting his guys in the zone and pumped up for this game, whereas Indiana's coaches, and especially Archie Miller, as of recently, has not done as great of a job to do that. And then, although that 10-minute stretch was just a lack of mental focus, you're looking at a loose ball turnover, Devontae Green trying to throw it up into up the court on a fast break and gets it poked out, and then it's an easy fast break layup to end the half, and then that's how you go into the locker room. Then you come out of the locker room, and the first thing that happens is Purdue goes on like a 3 or 4 point run straight off the bat, and then Archie has to waste an early timeout. It's kind of like, come on, you got hit in the mouth going in. You were down. I think it was 9 going into that, into the second half. Like, you got to come out with some urgency, and then you come out with it at all. And it's your rival, and you're in Mackey, which is already a tough place to play. It's just really disappointing, that performance. That disappointing about Illinois, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I can't be disappointed about that game because I feel like we got jobbed. But as far as Purdue goes, that is completely our fault. We had a terrible game from Trace, terrible game from Devontae, just a terrible game all around, other than Rob, I think, finally picked it up in the second half. But by the time he picked it up, it was way too late, and the game was out of hand by then.
Oh, yeah. And then I was looking at the box score again, and the Hoosiers won the second half, which is a little frustrating, which, like you said, Matt, at the end of that first half was kind of where things ultimately fell apart, and then they weren't able to officially come back all the way. And it like you said, it did change going into the Illinois game, because technically it was a 1 point game, 67-66, when Rob hit that last second 3-point shot. But obviously the deficit was too far, unless they fouled him for some odd reason, was too far for them to even mathematically come back in time. But the game, Nathan, was obviously much different than the Purdue game, and this is a loss that, like Matt said, I think all Hoosier fans are echoing. It's obviously came at a very rough time with only 2 regular season games left, but the Hoosiers fought tooth and nail all the way to the very end, and there were spots where there was 5 or 6 minutes left, down 7. This is basically where the Hoosiers have always faded, and they would go down by double digits, and then that score would probably hover around double digits, if not down into the lower teens, in closer to 20. And there's a lot of different ways you could go with this, so I'm just going to open it up for you, Nathan, for your reactions after the Illinois game, and then we'll go specifically reacting to whatever the first thing you want to talk about, since there's obviously a multitude of things we could dive into.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's one of those strange games where you can't really point to one major problem that surfaced during the game. It was just a quality.
I could tell you one. The refs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
carry on.
Look,
I just had to say it. Sorry.
Before we get into that, because sure, there were definitely some really bad missed calls in that game, but like it was one of the few times really all season where Indiana's played kind of a back and forth, pretty high quality Big Ten basketball game. The crowd was into it. Both teams were playing hard, and they were locked in for 40 minutes. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't a masterpiece by any means. But it was quality. On one side you had Trace Jackson Davis, and you had Al Durham hitting some shots, and Justin Smith making plays. And on the other side you had Big Kofi Coburn inside for Illinois, rejecting everything that had a chance of being rejected. But also some big plays made by Andres Feliz and Ayo Dosunmu. It was a close game, start to finish, and you win some of those, and it's one of those things where you win some of those and you lose some of those, and Indiana just so happened to lose that game on Sunday. But hey, maybe this week they find themselves in another close game that they win, or in the Big Ten tournament they find themselves in another close game that they win. Because of the position Indiana has put themselves in, they still have a lot to play for. So when you have close losses like that, like you had on Sunday to Illinois, you can't let that weigh you down. You've got to, as a team, say, all right, let's pick 2 or 3 key takeaways from that game, apply them, figure it out next week, or in the postseason, where Indiana, again, they're going to have everything on the line, basically, from here on out.
So, Matt, what impressed you the most from this team during the Illinois game as a whole? And then also, what else was, let's just say the refs played no factor whatsoever into this game. What was the reason that the Hoosiers ultimately fell short at Illinois?
The reason they ultimately fell short, well, lack of post defense would be probably number one if you're going to take the refs out of it.
Sure.
Look, there was like a 5-minute stretch where Kofi went for Illinois. Kofi Cookburn went God mode on us and was just a completely unsnappable. Now, whether he was, clearing out and was, having offensive fouls not being called against him is another question altogether. Noah was on Twitter advocating for this highly during the game, but that's besides the point. We're not going to talk about the refs in this segment, or the fact that we had I counted 2 3-minute droughts where we didn't make a field goal. And this offense is inconsistent. I don't think you have to be a basketball analyst or watch a lot of IU basketball games to know this. But when you're on the road, you can have 1 3-minute lull, but 2 is going to be very hard to survive. And in the end, we were scrambling, trying to get back into the game as Ayo Dosunmu is hitting big 3-pointers in our face right when we start cutting the deficit, because we weren't gradually increasing our lead and or keeping pace with Illinois. If we do that, then we're not scrambling at the end to try to get back into it. So both those 3-minute runs coincided with the fact that we weren't getting the ball into the Trace, and Trace didn't look like he was himself. Now, Archie came out yesterday on his radio show and said he was dealing with a minor foot injury. I do remember him limping a little bit in the Illinois game. So that might have factored into things. However, even if that's the case, you still got to try to get him the ball. Like, he's out on the court. They're going to send a double. If they send a double, pass out of it, So it's just unfortunate. So lulls in the offense, lack of a defensive wall against Kofi Cookburn in the post.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, this is life in the Big Ten, where, Indiana's been kind of the exception, but almost every game is neck and neck. You're in a tough battle with basically anyone that you play. And it should be a perhaps harsh reminder to this Indiana team that every play, every move, every possession matters. And, if that's the lesson they learned from this game, it's going to be for the better. Even though it's a tough loss going back to Sunday, to lose to Illinois, a chance at a really nice quad 1 win, especially on the road for tournament seeding. I mean, all that would have been nice had they won. But if Indiana figures out the idea that every possession matters, it's going to be for the better.
Yeah. And Matt, I'll let you open the floodgates for this. We've mentioned briefly a couple of times, but we've been pretty good, I think, this year about talking about the quality of the refereeing on the court. And this is not something that is just partial to the Hoosiers. I think multiple times we've talked about how it was both ways, how a lot of the officiating was not up to snuff. And it's not just the IU games either. It's across the league at every game. And now as at least it's now fresh in Hoosier fans' mind, it's affecting the outcomes of the game. It's exactly like it's back to the kick was actually good type of thing, where it's affecting the outcomes of the games, and that's where it's potentially. And again, the Hoosiers shouldn't falter, but potentially, I mean, you got to think the scenario. And of course, the Hoosiers have 2 games that they can win, and it's all 100% up to them. But you got to think of the scenario. Let's say the Hoosiers lose these last 2 games and they find themselves outside of the bubble. One part that you could go back to is that game. I don't want to go there, but that's just this cycle that we're finding ourselves in with some of the officiating calls. And our new Big Ten commissioner is going to have to figure this out, because it's not just an Indiana problem. It's not just an Illinois problem. It's a Big Ten problem that all fans seem to be trying to voice.
Yeah, when we have Purdue fans on Twitter going, "Man, IU got robbed," you know it's a bad time for the referees.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure if you're a knowledgeable IU basketball fan, you saw on Twitter whether it was B-Town Banners tweeting about it, and they had a nice video of Rob Finney getting tripped, which I immediately thought was a trip. Or, the tie-up with 2 IU players on it, but somehow the one Illinois player gets the timeout. Or if you want to, rewind 20 seconds to Al getting absolutely hammered in the elbow on a 3-point attempt, and that literally high-fived in the elbow, and that not being called when it's quite obviously he had the whole palm on his elbow not being called. Look,
can I add to those 2?
Yeah, go ahead. We can talk about Kofi and, just go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, for that last play specifically, with the tie-up, I don't think it was very clear that either team had possession, and you have to have possession for a timeout to be called.
Again,
so they gifted Illinois a timeout there. And then if you also want to go into, which is something I mentioned on Twitter as well, if you really want to go into, you didn't think it was a tie-up and you think he had full possession of the ball to give them the timeout, I think refs forget that you can't move on the floor with the ball. That's a travel. You can't move around and you can't writhe around on the floor. You have to stay stationary. You literally can't pick a butt cheek up to try and move. That's literally the definition of a travel when you're on the ground with the ball. So there are so many different factors that went into it. And then I'm going to take what Crimson Cast talked about recently with that Al hit, adding on to that part, Matt, that Indiana wasn't airballing shots the whole game. When Al Durham misses that shot that much, something affected that shot. Affected that shot.
This was not the Purdue game, right?
Yes,
we weren't chucking balls and missing the hoop by 3 feet. No, this game we were actually hitting shots, right? In the Illinois game, we just hit a 3-pointer probably 3 possessions earlier, right down the floor.
Refs have no problem calling a foul 2 or 3 seconds after the play actually finishes. So why don't you do that if you see that it was affected? Let alone going into. I see Nathan's ready to jump in. We're all gonna jump on the train, and then we're just gonna take a sigh of relief. But that, like you said too, Matt, those Coburn just shoves. You could tell he's pushing his shoulder and his elbows extending all the way. It's like guards extending their arms. It's the same thing with the post guys down low, and they didn't call it once, which is why Indiana was kind of hesitant to go up at him, because they were just going to keep getting fouls, because he was getting away with what comes down to it is cheating. That's what it comes down to it. It's maybe not that much, but it's just getting away with stuff that is against the rules in the game.
Well, the worst part to me, you guys, was on the Al Durham missed call. It was like the ball was going in slow motion out of bounds as he missed it so badly. And the referees at that point decided okay, maybe it was blocked, and they said it was Illinois ball, and it just rubbed salt in the wound when they had to review the play just to check who it was off of, and it was so obvious that the Illinois player, I think it was Trent Frazier, hit Durham on the arm, and you could see the Fox Sports 1 coverage picked up an exchange between the referees and Indiana's coaching staff where the ref was just like, he had one of those guilty smirks on his face, like, whoops, my bad. And Archie at that point was just like, well, what can I do now? Like,
besides not get a technical, nothing.
So it's just there was double and triple whammy there when seeing that Durham miscalled. But that was the worst officiated game of the season to this point. Like, I don't think it was close.
Yeah.
A game that Indiana was involved in. It was really bad, and obviously those calls at the end.
Both sides.
The calls at the end were the ones that stuck out the most, but overall, just neither team. They were bad both ways, and it was hard to watch at times.
I was surprised that Race Thompson didn't foul out of this game. The amount of times that Race would wrap up Kofi, like when he was defending, and like refused to let him get to the ball, and they didn't call it. I was like, this is a gift. Thank you. I will take this. So yeah, both ways. This game was just terrible. Terribly officiated. And the Al Durham foul on the 3-pointer, right? Like, Al shot really well in this game. We shot 50% from the 3-point line in this game. Al was 5 of 5 from the free throw line in this game.
Well, the Hoosiers were 10 for 10.
Yeah,
the Hoosiers were 10 for 10 at that point. The Hoosiers had not missed a free throw until
Al was
Trace
5 for 5 for the game. We were down 3. He gets fouled. I don't think it's out of the question that he at least hits 2 of those 3 free throws.
I agree with that.
And that
as our best free throw
changes
shooter.
The complete course of the rest of the game. Ayo doesn't then go down the court. I think, was that 62-60 that he did that, or was it 65-62 that I think it was 65-62 that happened.
Yeah.
Because then they go down the court and they get 2 from Kofi. That's still a 3-point game. It's not a 4-point game, which is then 2 possessions for IU. It's a 3-point game, and we were shooting the 3 well. So it completely changes the complexion of the game. It's really annoying that happens. So, and then as the refs see that on the replay, they then have to go into the next possession knowing, and I know if you're a ref, you're like, there's no such thing as a makeup call. That's true. But there is such thing as benefit of doubt for the other team following a missed call, which means if you run down the court again and there's another 50-50 shot again, guess what happens? On the floor, you call it in favor of the other team because deep down you messed them up the last time. So IU's fumbling the possession all over the place. Fine. You don't call the trip on Rob. Fine. But call the tie-up at least because we have the possession arrow. And that's just a 50-50. We work the game correctly.
Or you might not even know who has the tie-up and you're just like calling it how it should have been called.
Yes, just call the tie-up in that position. If there's 2 guys on the ball and 1 guy who has gone down on the ground to get it, there's 2 guys on top of him, just call the tie-up. Almost all the time. Just do it because it's what happens. He doesn't have clear possession of the ball, but both teams are scrapping for it. Just call a tie-up. Use the possession arrow. That's why it's there. It's the only reason it's in college basketball is why it's there. It's just so annoying that is how the game ends. I would have just loved a fair shot at the end of that game. We didn't get it. That happens. It's the Big Ten. That's why the Big Ten hasn't won a national championship since 2000. Thank you, Jim Delaney. Case closed.
Well, I would be curious to see Illinois once again as an opponent for Indiana in the Big Ten tournament. One of those Thursday or Friday matchups. If Indiana
I think we match up well against them.
Out of all the sort of solid teams in the Big Ten, the Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, whatever, I think if I could choose, if Archie Miller could choose, I think he would say, give me the Illini
Michigan State
as a matchup. Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think Archie wants another Michigan State matchup. I think he's going to take the 3-0 record the last 2 years and just set that aside.
Keep
Take
that,
it to
put
next
that in the
year.
bank. Take it to the bank. Yeah.
But yeah, Matt, I used to be a basketball referee, and definitely not nearly the stakes that these refs are at. But
No.
I can tell you for sure that makeup calls, like you said, are not supposed to be a thing, but they are 100% deep down. They are 100% something that affects you. The next, I can tell you for sure, the next normal, without any other bias, if this referee is not having any bias towards a specific team, I can tell you if they know they missed a call, the next legitimate 50-50 ball or 50-50 whatever it was that they saw, I can guarantee you their instinct is going to go to try and make it up.
Exactly. Where was that instinct in this game? Because
it wasn't.
That owl thing happened 20 seconds and a possession before Rob's trip and then fumble of the ball and then lack of, a tie-up call. That happened 20 seconds before. It's not like that happened on the same possession, right? Like if that all happens sequentially really fast, I get why maybe all the calls don't go our way because they don't have time to, process what is going on. No, you had 2 possessions. You had an entire replay review to sit there and internalize what is going on, and they still didn't call it our way. And that's why we feel we got gypped. So,
yeah. So I think we've had enough ranting, and hopefully you were able to just yell on a run or yell in your car, wherever you were, just empathizing with how frustrating the end of that game was. Oh, I forgot to mention, going into that final that Trace Jackson play, where it was basically one of the, at that point it seemed like it was the final play of the game for Indiana, trying to tie it up. Someone knocks on our door, and I was at my parents' house with a bunch of the dogs there, and I had to answer it because the dogs were going crazy, and it was I won't put the candidate under there, but it was a political person coming to the door to talk about where I should vote for the primary elections today, and I was like, no, sorry, bye. I'm gonna watch this last play of the game. I almost missed the at the time that Trace last play of the game because someone was trying to do some political campaigning at that point. But let's move on to maybe not sort of kind of what happened in the past, but maybe a more positive note what happened in the past, Nathan, with who won the week this past week for IU sports.
Yeah, there was a lot to choose from.
It was a very busy week.
The women's basketball team had a good week.
Very much so.
Baseball and softball teams in action. The men's Big Ten swimming and diving championships were here on campus, but the men's track and field team at Indiana won the Big Ten title over the weekend, knocking I think they beat Iowa by a few points. As the Hoosiers won the Big Ten track and field championship, and the men's, the
indoor
women finished
track and field.
Yep, indoor. Yep, the women finished 4th, so pretty respectable effort from them as well. Head coach Ron Helmer doing great things at IU, the track and field program, winning the Big Ten indoor title. The men, crushed it.
Yep. And like you said, swim and dive, Big Ten championships were this weekend. Not quite the year that the Hoosiers have been used to recently, but they've had to restock, obviously, from a few recent very good athletes that they've had on their team, aka Lily King. But then also, like you said, Nathan, the women's team, also got to give them a shout out. Career best in Big Ten wins at 13. That's the most Big Ten conference wins that they've ever had, which is awesome and good for them. They're going to start on Friday. They locked up the 4th seed, so watch out for catch a game. It's the Big Ten tournament, so just BTN stuff. Catch the women in action this week. So let's kind of segue into this week. And I know our topic is on to the final home game, so let's sort of kind of preview and talk about the importance of the Minnesota and Wisconsin game. I think it's pretty safe to say that Indiana has to win at least one and definitely win both to feel relatively comfortable. Do you guys agree that win 2, you feel pretty comfortable? You're not sweating on Selection Sunday. Win 1, and again, not talking about Big Ten tournament results. Win 1, you're going to be sweating, and or you need something to happen during the Big Ten tournament. Do we agree with that?
No, not particularly. It just depends on. It depends on our And sorry, my bad, because I think I was supposed to not explain this, but I'm gonna explain it anyways.
That's fine.
It depends how the game goes. Really, it's not a black and white thing, right? If we win one and then the other one's really close at home, like Wisconsin's now, I think tied in the loss column for the lead, the Big Ten lead. Now that Maryland just lost to Rutgers, so if Wisconsin comes in battling for a possible share, if not sole possession of a Big Ten title, and we lose them in a close game at home on senior night after beating Minnesota, is it tomorrow or Thursday?
Wednesday night.
Yeah. So tomorrow. If we beat Minnesota tomorrow and then lose in a close game to the eventual champions of the Big Ten at home, I don't think the committee is going to go and look at that and go, they're playing so terrible. I mean, look at their last 3 games. I mean, they got jobbed at Illinois. They beat Minnesota, and then they lost to the eventual champions in Wisconsin in the last 3 regular season games. I don't think they're going to be able to hold us out on that. Lose both games, obviously we're then sweating. If you win one and then get blown out in another one, I think you're probably sweating. But I think given the circumstances, obviously beat Minnesota. It's a must-win game tomorrow. If you play a really good game against Wisconsin, they make a couple more shots, they win the game in a close one. I don't think we're in that bad of a situation that we're going to be sweating it out. We're not going to be like one of the last 4 in. But that's a blowout. That's a different equation.
Yeah, I think if Indiana beats Minnesota and then avoids a loss to Northwestern or Nebraska in the Big Ten tournament, I think Indiana's in. That Wisconsin game, win or lose, I think they're fine. If they beat Minnesota, I think IU's in. With 2 wins, it's no question.
For sure, yeah. So, and at this point, it depends on how Purdue goes, like you were talking about, Nathan, to where if they get into that Wednesday or Thursday game, and everyone's been talking about how actually should Indiana play in that Wednesday game, because you've got you've got a Wednesday game where you would play, you're going to be above Minnesota more than likely, unless they lose both games and Minnesota wins both games. Either way, you're still going to play Nebraska and or Northwestern, depending on how they finish out their season. Versus technically, if you would, let's just say for now, you and Purdue switch, so Indiana is that 10th seed, you'd be playing because you get the first 4 bye, you'd be playing someone like a Penn State or an Iowa, versus getting at least 1 win against one of the lower level competitions. And that's a big question. I know, Nathan, you have definitely an opinion on that part.
It's a really interesting question, because the optics of playing on Wednesday are not good, right? The selection committee will see that Indiana is in the bottom 4 in the Big Ten. But yeah, when you look at the other side of things, the upside is there. You can bag a pretty easy win.
It's a win. It's a Big Ten conference win, technically.
And the bottom 2 teams are much worse than the rest of the field in the Big Ten tournament. Yes. And for what it's worth, you can maybe work out some of your weaknesses, maybe experiment on a couple things before you face another tough team on Thursday. There is a lot of downside, though, and that's where I'm just a little bit hesitant, because to this point, perhaps the biggest thing on Indiana's resume is the fact that they don't have any bad losses. I mean, they don't have any arguably bad losses. If you're saying the worst loss is home to Purdue, Purdue is still rated very highly. I think they're top 30 in KenPom and maybe top 40 in the net rankings. Yeah. That's still a pretty good loss. That's a much better worse loss than anyone else on the bubble. So, so the downside is there. And the optics are, but I can kind of see both sides of it. It's strange how that's worked itself out here as the Big Ten tournament expanded to 14 teams in 5 days.
Yeah, and basically the scenario that probably would present itself, more than likely Indiana would beat Minnesota and lose to Purdue, would have still a good last couple of their games, and that's where Indiana might find themselves on Wednesday. Then they'd be 19 and 12. They'd be 19 and 12 overall with an 9 and 11 record. And then, like you said, I think you're 100% right, Nathan. Anything can happen in a game, and you lose that game. Woo, you lose a game like that, then definitely we're going to be sweating on Selection Sunday. But you bag that win, you go 10-11 in the conference, and you've got that 10 wins, and you've got that 20 win mark. And then you get to go to a game where you're playing with house money against a Penn State or an Iowa or DePaps Fall, with how close that this very this like it could be a 4 or 5 or 6 man race for the top few spots. But Matt, do you have any wrap up comments for that?
The one thing I wanted to say real quick is, like, if you do get the 10 seed or the 9 seed, your first game is against still like Michigan or Ohio State or
that's
even,
what I'm saying. Yep,
it's brutal. So I don't know. I'm not sure what the best way out of this is for Indiana, but maybe it's to win both games this week and take care of business at home.
I was about to say that is 100% the best way to get out of this, is to win both games and lock yourself into the tournament, which is why Hoosier fans really wanted that Illinois win. Could you imagine they'd be 19-10 right now, 9-9 in the conference. You just bagged a really good road win. I think the Hoosiers would be in the tournament regardless of what happened at the last 2 games. But I think that's the for sure. We're just talking about we're just playing all the sides, because we could say win 2 games, bye, and then that'd be a pretty boring podcast. But Matt, do you have any wrap up comments for that before we officially look at the last 2 games more in depthly with the actual competition on the court?
I am not comfortable with us going to the Big Ten tournament needing a win. As a person that sat in Madison Square Garden, saw our hearts ripped out by Rutgers live in front of a national audience, I'll let you know, Big Ten tournament sucks, and I hate it, and I don't want us to have to go win there. And especially since it's going to be we're going to be playing on that first day against one of like Northwestern or Nebraska, because if you lose that game, then you're definitely out of the tournament, because you just had your worst loss of the season as the last possible game the committee can look at for you. There's way too much at stake for me. I would much rather us be in one of those spots where you have to play Ohio State or Michigan first in the Big Ten tournament, and then we lose, and everybody goes, Indiana never plays well in the Big Ten tournament. That's fine, whatever. Like, they had to play Michigan or Ohio State, who has had their number as of recently. So I'd much rather that happen than us go and have the possibility of pulling another Rutgers in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, Matt, I'm going to kick it back over to you. Do you have a social media shout out for us this week?
I do not. However, I have a cool social media moment that has nothing to do with IU basketball, but has to do with basketball in general. And that is Vermont senior. Oh God, I lost his name. Where is he?
It's Josh Speidel.
Josh Speidel. He is from Indiana. He 5 years ago was in a car accident. He was in a coma. He's a manager for the University of Vermont's basketball team. Scored his first NCAA points tonight. They did a really cool thing where they were playing University of Albany at home. They let Albany score first on a free layup, and then they let Josh score, and then he was subbed out of the game. I think that's a really cool senior night moment, and that's part of like what makes college basketball so awesome, right? Because it's so big, right? It's like a national product, but at the same time, it's still got that high school feel to it, and you got to love that from Vermont and Indiana native Josh Speidel. So.
Yeah, those moments are really cool, especially like, was it USC a couple years ago with the blind guy going out to play snapping football?
Yeah.
Those are really awesome, awesome moments. And
on that, by the way, Speidel, before the accident, he was a pretty highly recruited D1 basketball player.
Yeah, he was good. Yeah,
UIC offered him Buffalo. Vermont is where he ended up. But amazing moment. You guys should definitely catch it if you haven't yet.
I thought, Matt, when you were just talking about generic sports social media, I thought you were going to talk about the Mike Trout hitting that golf ball yesterday.
Ooh, that was so sweet. I've never watched a video of somebody hit a golf ball and went, ooh, I feel bad for the ball.
Yeah.
Like, oh my, that thing was
or what it technically hit, because it definitely cleared those Top Golf nettings that was that
high. There's like the video you can like see on the screen, like the top left corner, you can see the trajectory of the golf ball, and it's just literally a straight line on the screen. It doesn't dip at all.
If you haven't seen it, the Angels were having some fun at Top Golf, just doing some swings, and Mike Trout just did Mike Trout things. And it's just, instead of a baseball, it was a golf ball. And you really need to go on to it's the Los Angeles the Angels Twitter page and just scroll through a couple and then just look into the videos, and it's just, you'll watch it quite a few times just to fathom what happened.
It's so sad that my fellow Eagles fan, Mike Trout, has been stuck in Anaheim his entire career. If he was on like the Cubs or the Yankees or the Astros or the Dodgers or any other team other than the Angels, he would be considered like one of the 5 best baseball players maybe ever. But he's been stuck.
It would be close to that. But let's get on to some more basketball talk. As many of you might be listening to this, the Minnesota game will be probably tonight, Wednesday, March 4th, 7:00 p.m. back on BTN. ESPN matchup predictor thinks 63.6% chance for the Hoosiers. Ken Pom thinks 59%, which I think are honestly a little low for Minnesota at home. But Minnesota's 31st in Ken Pom right now, which is pretty interesting. They're higher than the Hoosiers still, which is how everyone's just baffled by. I understand how a lot of this stuff works, and we don't have time to go into this. Just find I think it was Podcast on the Brink. It was either Bart Torvik or Ken Pom talk about what goes into this. Great podcast if you can find it. It actually explains it to where you're a little more knowledgeable of how it works. But that's the kind of rating that everyone's like, why is Minnesota still ahead of Indiana? Even all of the other things considered. But big game, we all think it's definitely a must win. If not 100% for sure, have to beat Wisconsin. 100% for sure, no doubt. Otherwise, it's... you got to get a Big Ten tournament run. But then Wisconsin goes to, is it Sunday, March 7th? Did I have that right? Or was it
Saturday?
Saturday. That's what I thought. I thought I wrote it down as Sunday, but I thought it was Saturday. Saturday, March 7th at noon. Great, another noon game on ESPN/ESPN2. Right now, ESPN thinks the Hoosiers are about a 56% chance, and Ken Pom agrees, right at 56% chance. So, Nathan, we don't have to necessarily preview the specific opponent since we've seen the Hoosiers play both of them on the road. But coming into Bloomington, is there anything specifically that the Hoosiers might need to do against an opponent, a specific matchup, or is it just kind of do the thing they've been doing mostly recently and get out at least with one W?
Yeah, you've got to bring the fight, like you brought it to Purdue and Illinois last week, and then Penn State and Minnesota the week before that. Daniel Oturu's the guy for Minnesota, and if you guys don't remember him from the last game or whatever, I mean, this guy's one of the best players in the Big Ten. He's 20 and 11 every night. He's trying to be the first player in the Big Ten to average 20 points and 10 rebounds, as crazy as it seems, since 2004, when Chris Humphreys, more popular for his marriages since then, or at least one marriage since then. Chris Humphreys did it for Minnesota back in 2004. So Otu is trying to make a little bit of history there, but Minnesota also likes to shoot a ton of threes. And when a team does that, it's always dangerous, because even though to this point they've shot a really bad percentage from beyond the arc, all of a sudden, all you got to do is hit catch fire for one night. And if Minnesota goes, 10 for 15 or 12 for 20 or something like that, then that's where problems could arise for Indiana. But the other part of this, though, Minnesota's had some really tough losses the last few weeks. Just recently, they lost a close one, shockingly choked away a game at home against Maryland last week. They fought. They got up off the mat and fought hard at Wisconsin on Sunday night, only to lose that one close to the buzzer as well. So I don't know what the effort level is going to be like for Minnesota, but there can't be any doubts as to where it is for IU. IU's got so much to play for. The focus and the intensity has to be there, start to finish.
Now, Matt, with a resurgence, if you will, from Wisconsin, we all think this game was not an automatic W, but at least in terms of the way the Big Ten had been shaping up, as close to feeling good about a win as you could. At least even a month ago when Indiana was in a slump, we were like, all right, going to check Minnesota, check Wisconsin off. Wisconsin's not as much of a check anymore. So
No.
are the Hoosiers going to have problems, or are they going to have matchup problems specifically, or are they still going to have a good shot to beat Wisconsin regardless of what happens against Minnesota?
I still think you have a good shot to beat Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin had one of their better games against us. And we played them in Madison. Like, I think everything was clicking for them. They still had Kobe King at that
It was
point.
the opposite for IU, which also helped their cause.
Right. Yeah. And IU had one of its worst games that we've played. I do think we match up well now that we've changed a little bit of the defensive system. Nate Reavers, again, is a stretch 5 for Wisconsin. It feels like Wisconsin almost always has a guy that can just stretch the floor at the 5 position, dating back to Frank Kaminsky. But, Nate Reavers is, again, one of those guys who's just going to be able to score all 3 levels as a really tall guy with a Wisconsin logo on his chest. It just seems like there's always one of those guys. But we should be able to play against him very well with the coming out party of Race Thompson. He'll be able to match up well against him. Trey Jackson Davis has shown he's able to guard stretch 4s as well. So that shouldn't be that much of a problem. Our guard play was abysmal and is still at times abysmal, but was especially so against Wisconsin.
A little less abysmal.
It's a little bit less abysmal now. It's inconsistent now instead of consistently awful. Yes. So, and we'll take that.
It's inconsistent instead of, like you said.
And Wisconsin, yeah. Wisconsin has definitely gotten to a groove as of recently. If you look back on their season when we played them first, which was in November, early December when we played them, they were having a bit of a rough start. They were having some locker room problems. Then Kobe King leaves and goes and transfers to Nebraska. And now all of a sudden, this team has gotten a lot better. They're getting production from people like Brad Davidson. They're getting production from people like Trice. And Nate Reavers has stepped up into his role magnificently for them. And they're 12-6 in the conference, and they're one game out in the win column from tying Maryland for the Big Ten lead.
And on that note, I mean, they're playing Northwestern today or tomorrow. I mean, Wisconsin's going to be playing for a Big Ten title
game.
Yeah, they're going to be playing for a Big Ten title when they come here on Saturday. They are. Yeah, I mean, Micah Potter is one guy I wanted to mention specifically just because this is a guy who transferred from Ohio State but was ineligible when Indiana played Wisconsin the first time. So he's a tall, big guy who can hit the 3. He's shooting 48% from beyond the arc this year, which I believe leads the conference in Big Ten play. So he's kind of another. I mean, Wisconsin, like you said, Matt, some of the way things have played out, they're pretty much a completely different team. No Kobe King. Yes, Micah Potter. And I just wanted to mention one other thing. We have a big-time scouting report from Minnesota on Indiana HQ for the Wednesday game. And
Go check it out.
There's going to be another one for Saturday's game. And there are going to be ones for every Big Ten matchup and every NCAA tournament matchup or any other postseason tournament that Indiana finds themselves in. So definitely keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and to add to Wisconsin players we need to look out for, one more is Brevin Pritzel, a guard for Wisconsin. They get really good minutes from him. He averages 8.2 points and 3.7 rebounds from the guard position. So he's somebody that you're going to have to look out for.
Nathan was totally right about Wisconsin potentially playing for a Big Ten title. Maryland plays on Sunday, so they won't know the outcome of that Maryland game to see. And it's against Michigan too, so there's a good chance. It's at home for Maryland, but there's a good chance. So Wisconsin more or less will be playing for it because they have to play like they're obviously going to try and play for the title. And because they did beat Maryland earlier this year, so they would have that head-to-head tiebreaker for a tied conference record. So, but senior night for senior day, senior night, quote unquote. It's really senior day for Indiana, so crowd's going to be there. But
and historically, we play really well on senior night.
Yeah.
Well, we just play really well in Assembly Hall in general, but like we do play really well on senior night if you look back historically. So.
Yep, but the chips will fall where they may. The podcast next week is going to be a very interesting one, potentially. So we'll talk about, obviously, the Big Ten tournament next week. But hopefully the Hoosiers will have already at least virtually locked their spot into the dance. But that's going to wrap it up for our 131st show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you to the live audience, always, for coming out and participating in the chat. Tuesday nights if you want to come and chat with all of us. We'll be back next Monday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off, as always. But news and updates, Twitter, subscribe so you don't miss our weekly episodes. Most importantly, leave us a review, Apple Podcast, Facebook, tell a friend, share our links. That's really how we grow our podcast so we can reach all those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.